Good afternoon once again, Mr. Palmer. How are you, sir?
Doing good, John. How about you?
I can't be much better than I am. I get to watch you do the drum solo. Basically, I think one of these days I'm just gonna put a set of drumsticks in the mail and you're just gonna have to go nuts. But just don't break the screen or anything because yeah, I'm not
I
buying you a
can,
new monitor.
I
That'll
can, I
work.
can use pertains. I can
That'll
use.
work. That's probably it. Might be safer. Maybe I don't know. I'll have to see if something from Nerf can come in handy. But what are we going to be talking about today? What are we up with? What's going on with Mr. Palmer out in Colorado, other than you want to be a drummer on tour right now?
I could never be a drummer. So it's one thing when you try to coordinate, you know, your hands doing something different, right? It's that's one thing because you're either going up and down, you're going to different beats, you can do stuff like that. The problem with being like a drummer on tour is it's totally different than being, say, a drummer on a like in a symphony or a larger type of band, right? Because like you have a whole percussion section and one person is responsible for one thing. Like you'll have like one dude who's only responsible for playing the snare drum. You'll have like one dude who's responsible, or chick, or I don't know. You'll have one person, right? And like you'll have the person who like, my job is to play the cymbal, and so they have their little thing, and they're like, my job is to just beat the cymbal, right? Or they, but a drummer in a band who's like playing in a drum set, like they have both hands going with the drums, and you can't see it, but my feet's going crazy too. So they're going like this, right? And they're just like all over the place. And the problem you have is when you need your feet to be doing something different at the same time as your hands. Like if you're playing a hi hat, that's that two cymbals that are like this, and they go like that. That's called a hi hat, right? And you can do some pretty cool things with a hi-hat because you it makes different sounds when the hi-hats are closed versus when the hi-hats open up like this. And so but what happens is you now have two hands doing something different while your foot that's controlling the hi-hats doing something else while your other foot's doing the bass drum. And so what ends up happening is it's just a disaster. And I'm not coordinated enough as a white guy to be able to play a drum set. I'm just going to come out and say,
Oh well, I was gonna say there are plenty of yeah, we're not gonna go there, but I think it's funny. I'm bummed because I already have a title sort of in mind for this episode because I know where we're going with this, but I can't use what I want to use now because we've already used the Bandcamp episode from last year, from last season. But like, who knew? 5 minutes in, not even 5 minutes in. First of all, off the rails as always, guaranteed. Set the clock to that. But did you think you were going to turn into the Ruckcast and hear about bands and instruments? And let's be honest, we're not classy enough to be talking about an orchestral arrangement. Like, come on, you're not going to put us in a symphony. We can't even get in the building if we bought a ticket. I'm also
well,
grateful that we do YouTube because that was really funny. If we were still audio only, as we were most of last season, the
mhm.
people would have been robbed of a great experience. And I'm telling you right now, if you're listening on in the car to this episode when it airs, and you made the mistake of doing audio only, do yourself a favor. We are on YouTube, Ruckus Education Channel. Go find this episode and view it because you will not be disappointed.
Well, I take exception to your comment about being off the rails because honestly, I don't feel like it's off the rails. That
We
was
never got on
actually
the rails. We never got on the
well,
rails.
no, I think I'm totally still on the rails. I think I'm going down the track. I am still tracking for what today's episode is about. So you
Oh,
can't say we're off the rails. Now everything else is valid. But I say I still maintain that we stayed on the rails because of what I'm about to get into on
okay.
today's episode.
I'll buy it.
And
I'll let
so
you have
we'll
that one. I would say we could let people comment in the show, but well, find us on Twitter and tell us if
yeah.
you think I was right or if Jim was right. But anyways, so
So yeah, we
now
will
that
let
we've
the
had
listeners decide.
we've had our lesson for the day, we've done our band lesson, we know how to play drums. Where are we going with Wi-Fi today?
So today is we're continuing our series on the 10 things that John and I would like you to know about Wi-Fi. Um, and so let's see, where are we with that one? Let's see. We got it pulled up just in time to change to this slide. So last time we were talking about was number 5, which was the default isn't always best. And we had an episode that we sort of segued into off of the last series, the last part of this series, where we talk about residential defaults. So that was last week's episode. You can go catch up. But this sort of ties into, my ability to play a drum set and needing all these different things. And there's all these different requirements, right? So we have the requirements, we have designs, we have the defaults and best. But for number 6 in our series is trust but verify. And so the thing about playing a drum set is, it's easy to verify if Jim can be able to do all these things that he needs to be able to do when he's playing a drum set, because you'll be able to hear it, right? It's an instant verification of whether or not Jim can play a drum set or not. That's a pretty simple verification. And I will just, spoiler alert, Jim cannot play a drum set. I can play the air drums quite well, and I can fake it really well. But
it's about up there with all of us singing well in the shower.
Exactly, right? There's easy ways to verify.
Don't verify I can sing in the shower. But anyways.
That's a story for now
we're off the rails.
Now we're off the rails. Okay. So because yes, it's easy enough to verify that Jim can't play the drum set. I think I could play the snare drum though. Just saying. I think I could do the
I did the triangle in like pre-K, so I could probably not do that again, but
I'll tell you the one thing I can't do is the steady like a drum roll where it's like I can do it for just a little bit, and then if you ask me to go along for a longer time, then I fail. But anyway, and part of the reason why I fail is because I'm human and I'm not gifted in the musical realm, which is fine. And just like, some people might say that we're gifted in the Wi-Fi realm, I would maybe push back on that just a little bit and say that we're not. Because at the end of the day, we still are humans, right? I can't do an extended drum roll. John topped out at playing the triangle. There's all these different things that we're not great at. And it's because we're humans, right? Which sort of is why we have to trust but verify. And I can hear the people sitting in their cars because they still haven't gotten back over to YouTube yet to see me play the drums, screaming at their car stereo saying, yes, but with coding, with scripting and all these other things, we've now gone past that. And I will tell you that, computers and scripts were coded by humans. There's a joke. there's a running joke. It's one click to rule them all, one click to crash them all. All coding allows you to do is make a lot of mistakes at the same time really fast.
Yeah.
It allows you to do that. I'm not saying that you would, but this comes back to the trust but verify, right? Is because there's, no matter what we do, no matter what we think we've told our networks to do, which are just computers, it's always the same thing of my mother calling me going, my computer is doing things I didn't tell it to do. And I'm like, well, it's debatable. You might not remember you told your computer to do this. It might not even have been you. It might have been some virus that you decided to download that's telling your computer that every time you open up a browser, go to this website. But it's still, something is still telling it to do something. And so this is what I wanted to cover, is the fact that, and this is a conversation that we have, John and I, we have these conversations all the time, and we have conversations with all these other people and all these different other times about the fact that, at the end of the day, we still have to verify what's happening, and because, you get a bad script, you get a bad code, you think that you've told it to do one thing and it's doing something else, you still need to go in and verify it. Now, what are common things that we think you should verify? Well, coincidentally enough, this happens to be the same list that we had from 2 weeks ago, because these are all these basic things. And so if you think about it, right, we were talking about the defaults. And what are some of the defaults that we examine? Well, the first one is operating channels. We get this all the time. about what channel should I operate on. Well, I think I wanted to be on this one, but maybe you told your network to run a auto channel thing and you forgot to tell it to not. And for a long time it was doing one thing and you thought it was doing something else. And so it's about, hey, it seems, it almost seems like it's archaic or from caveman days to be like, hey, let's actually walk out into our network and see what are the channels we're actually operating on. I mean, it's not as
Right.
common anymore,
No, but I
but
mean, it's measure twice, cut once, right? And
yeah.
you know, I'm a big fan, and I was a big fan when I managed a network day to day. I'm a big fan of getting out there and getting your hands dirty a little bit, so to speak. Because here's the reality, right? You've got a tool, whatever monitoring tool you're using, whatever you're using to look at the network from your desk, that's telling
Mhm.
you X. Now, you might trust that the tool is pretty right because you've been using it long enough that it's been very accurate all the time. But you still need to go out there because you've got a customer that's called you up and said, I don't have good Wi Fi here. Something's not working. Now, are you going to argue with the customer? Maybe. Depends on the person you are. You might do it. But you really need to get out there and verify. You need to take the measurements yourself from the field and see what's wrong. We talked about this on a prior episode. Maybe you've got an AP that's on a channel that you are okay using, except they've got a device that's not okay using that channel. Something
Yeah.
like that.
Like, my computer decided it wasn't online. So let's,
Perfect timing.
yeah, this is great timing. This is what happens when you try to go live. So we'll go back to this one. When we take a look at my one AP that I'm running on Ruckus one, and you come over and this probably isn't the case anymore. I think this was probably something many years ago. You'd have this problem with, you're just looking at it and say, hey, what are my RF channels? What are my channels running on? Am I really on channel 128? Am I really on channel 6? And this is nice and easy because the AP that we're looking at just happens to be this AP that's over my shoulder, uh, hanging right there. So it's easy enough to go take a look at and go like, hey, is this R610, is it running on channel 128? Well, it's easy enough to find out. And we go, oh, look, I have an R610 that's running on channel 128. And look, I can even see this running at 20 megahertz wide, which is good for me. So I can verify that stuff. I can actually have a third party independent tool verify that what I think is happening. Wow, it won't even let me open that one up.
Well,
Oh,
while you're dealing with I was gonna say while you're dealing with the technical issues, a good example of this in general is the design element of it, right? You do a
Mhm.
predictive design that tells you that you should expect certain coverage, and as much as people like to cut the corners, and we've seen a lot of them not do the validation survey, it's the trust but verify. I trust that I know what I'm doing with the design tool, and I trust that my design will work. But it's verifying that your design actually does work, and it's actually verifying that the people, humans, as you said, put my APs where I told them to put them and in the right manner, and they didn't mount them upside down or behind sheetrock or whatever. Um, and honestly, I love my favorite is when I've used to validate work of people who I know I could trust. And they're like, "What, you don't trust me?" I'm like, "Well, yeah, I do, but I'm still validating it because at the end of the day, somebody else is going to ask me, and they're like, "Well, did you check the work?" No, I didn't. I trusted that my so and so did it. And
Well,
that one time, it only takes that one time for somebody to be wrong. And
especially in enterprise Wi-Fi, right? Because it's not that I don't trust the designer. It's not that I don't trust, well, to be honest, we don't really. But it's not that I'm telling you I don't trust you. But there's enough moving parts. There's enough moving hands between the person who designs, the person who installs, the person who cables, the person who does. There's enough moving parts within, trying to get, especially a new network up and running, that we have to verify these things. And it's a great point about doing a validation survey where you actually get somebody to take the time and you spend that money to have that person walk your entire facility, walk your network, and with a scanning device, with a survey device that's collecting all of this data. Because then all these things that we're talking about, right? It'll tell you, well, what operating channel are you on? What what is your minimum basic rate? The other one that ends up being a big thing is the transmit power. Man, I came in the right place. I'm so glad I did that bullet point that way because a lot of there's a question about transmit power, and this came up earlier this week actually, where I was talking with somebody and I said, we were talking about transmit power, and it's like what you set your transmit power to can be a contentious topic. I tell people all the time that I never like to set my transmit powers at maximum transmit power. And the reason why that is because if something goes wrong between me figuring out what the attenuation value of a wall is, or a shelf, or just any of these other little things that can happen that you can miss just because there's so many different variables. If I plan to set my APs at maximum transmit power, then I have no ability to turn it above that power. And so that's where you can, when you do those validation surveys, you can come in and you can say, hey, you know what is my transmit power? What is my signal level that I'm receiving things at? What are these levels? Are these the levels that I expect? Are these those different things? And so that's where it's a verification. Not only did I set the transmit power like I wanted to see it on this tab, when I went in and said, hey, what did I want to set this transmit power to be for this particular AP? It's not only is this what I set in my AP properties. We come down and we see what the transmit power was configured to be set at. Radio, you come in here. Oh, look, I have my 2.4 is at minimum. 5 gigahertz right here is at minus 5 dB. So that's what I set my transmit power at, right? So that's one thing to verify, hey, that this is where I want it to be. But then the next thing to verify is, along with your transmit power, when we come back into this tool, we go, hey, what is the RSSI value that I'm seeing? Oh, I'm seeing it at a neg 42. Is that what I expected? Is that what I wanted to get? Oh, no, I expected to see it a little bit higher. Okay, then there's something in between my AP and where I'm measuring the signal at that verifies that, oh, by the way, there's actually a printer that lives in between those two. And quite honestly, that's what's happening right now with this, is there is a printer that lives between the device that's scanning and the AP. And so it's not that big of a deal now, but when we talk about verification, when we want to verify what's happening, this transmit power translates into a receive signal level indicator, RSSI value. And so this is what we're verifying is that, hey, is what the client devices are seeing, is that really what I wanted to see? Did everything else work right? Because there's a lot of moving hands. There's a lot of things that change. There's a lot of times when you do a design, especially for new buildings, and you walk in and you go, oh, look, they changed that wall and it's no longer what they told me it was going to be. And stuff happens. And so this is why we verify.
The other thing worth pointing out too, and I mentioned, sorry, I had to scratch my back. The one thing worth mentioning, I forgot we're on video sometimes. It's not just verifying a design like right away. One thing I did in a past life, because I was, responsible for a number of buildings that I had access to on a regular basis, which I didn't have to go flying around the country for. You would do a couple times a year. You would just walk through and with the tools. And sometimes it's not even a walk with the tools. Sometimes you're walking around, you're looking at your phone, and you're just kind of looking up. All the lights are still lit. Everything looks fine. The APs are where they're supposed to be. We as Wi-Fi nerds get grief from our significant others sometimes. People always say about it on social media that when we're in a building, we look up because we want to see what Wi-Fi is mounted. We want to see how it's mounted. We want to see if they did it right, if they did it wrong, or whatever. But even just looking around at your access points, because I'm pretty sure we've both been in places where somebody who didn't need to touch the APs touched the APs because they thought they knew better. It's as simple as something like that, where the AP, like, I mean, my favorite was I would have an AP that was still connected on a drop ceiling, but instead of being where it was supposed to be on the grid, it was now above the ceiling. Because and I'd pull out the tools and I'd be like, I know the AP is here. I'm getting like neg 20. It's here. And so I climbed a ladder, popped it, and I'm like, why is it? And they're like, oh, we didn't want to see the light. The verification doesn't end when the building opens for business. You're always constantly verifying your network, I think, in my mind anyways.
And it's funny because this really is a conversation that needs to be targeted to people that run their own networks. Because there's one big thing that John touched on that I used to tell people all the time. They would ask me, they would be like, especially for certain features, they would ask me at my previous job, they're like, well, why did you do that? And I was like, well, because I had the time, right? If it took me 40 hours to solve a problem, then it took me 40 hours to solve the problem, but I had those 40 hours to spend. If you're a consultant, if you work in the industry and your job is to fly around and work on different networks each week, you don't have that time. You don't have that luxury to do that stuff. And so this is why when you hire somebody to do a network for you, they are always going to push. They might say, look, we can get away with not doing certain things, but one of the things they will always push for is a validation survey, is because they need to be able to be done with the project and then leave and go work on their next project. And so that's why they push for that, because that's their last opportunity to do that before they move on. But if you are a network operator, if you own your own network, this is the verification that John's talking about, is not only just, that one time, but walking around, and John's right, people messing with APs, or, like I once saw an AP that was actually swinging by the Ethernet cable from the ceiling. And you're just like, why didn't anybody say anything? It's still online, it's still connected. So from my tools sitting, at my desk, everything looked copacetic. I was getting complaints. I walked over there and I'm like, why didn't anybody say anything? And they're like, well, we didn't want to bother you. Well, come on, guys.
And that's the other thing too. We see a lot of people not reporting issues. Sometimes they don't know who to call. Sometimes they don't want to call. Sometimes they assume somebody else did.
So if you have the time, if you have the ability, walk around and verify that these things that we think we set, the things that we think we were running on, right? Is it still doing it? And again, there's lots of tools. I don't want to get into a conversation about tools, but I showed off one. Just take a look at it. Hey, is this really what I expected to see? And all of these things are really basic things. And the last one we're going to touch on is the 11 kVNR. The roaming stuff and all those other things, and tools will tell you which amendments are running. And it's not difficult. It's just investing a little bit of your time and, to verify that what you think you've done, what you think you've set, is what's actually happening in the environment that your users are operating in. Which
it makes great sense. The other thing I'm going to say before validating, because the packets never lie and things like that, we can say all that, and those are great. But the one other benefit of verifying by walking the floor of any floor that you can, assuming you're dedicated to that site, or if you're even if you're a consultant, even if you're there to hit it and get out, right? The benefit of walking the floor, especially 9 to 5, I get it. Sometimes customers can be a pain because they ask questions and they talk to you, but that's the beauty part, is sometimes they talk to you. And, if you're doing a new design, if you're doing a sort of a rip and replace, or if you're trying to tune and optimize, sometimes you don't get the point of contact giving you all of the information, like, hey, what are you really using? Or where are your pain points? And if you talk to, and I got this a lot, I should say, from like admin assistants on the floor, or you always knew because somebody was looking at you like, if you're walking around with the right tools, they're like, are you hunting ghosts? I've gotten them all. I'm sure we all have. But then you say, no, I'm scanning the Wi-Fi. I'm checking to make sure everything's working all right. Oh, hey, by the way, this wasn't working. I'm like, well, that's actually cellular. That's not Wi-Fi. But it's a chance for you to get a little bit of education out to the field, which is great. You doing community engagement was absolutely wonderful. But I can't tell you how many times I found out that people didn't know that we had a Wi-Fi team. They didn't know they could call tickets in to complain about the Wi-Fi and we could fix it. And, if you were rolling out new authentication methods, it gave you a chance to like talk to them because maybe they didn't go to the information sessions. They weren't quite sure. They didn't understand it. And then when you explained it to them and took 5 minutes to work on their device and make it work, they're like, oh, this is awesome. So there's trust and verify, but it's sort of, um, uh, it's just good to get out there. I mean, I think, but the
And
verification's huge.
and this leads me to my last point, which is something that I've told this story a lot, so we'll get it on to this podcast. And I call this having your own Vic test. And I, your story about talking to people in the end users, I cannot emphasize enough about how important that is because the Vic test is something that I use as part of my regression testing at my last job. We had a whole series of steps we would do for new hardware, for new firmware, things like that. And I had incorporated into that this thing I called the Vic test. Now, the Vic test is named after a lady that worked in the networking team at my last job, and her name was Victoria. Fantastic, wonderful lady. She'd been doing networking since X25 days. She'd been around. She was, I think she finally retired just this year, last year. She finally retired, which is good. Vic's been around for a while, but Vic was fantastic because Vic was a user of my Wi-Fi network. And Vic used to like to watch videos of baby goats on her phone. And so I was fortunate enough to be in a location in our office to where we had one AP that covered our office, and that was it. It didn't cover anywhere else just because of the odd location of where it was in the building. And so I would put our AP on the new firmware after I'd gone through all my other testing, and I would see if Victoria would notice. Now, because I worked in the same office as Vic, when her Wi-Fi broke, she knew who to call. She knew who to yell at. She didn't even get up. She just yelled from her desk, and she'd be like, "Jim, the Wi-Fi's broken." And then I would know. And she didn't know why. She didn't know what was happening. She just knew that she could not watch videos of baby goats on her phone. And so then that firmware or something would fail the Vic test, and I would know not to roll that out to a bigger audience. Because at the end of the day, Wi-Fi is about the end users being able to use their phone to connect, to do whatever it is they need to do. And so you walking around and talking to people and talking to end users, I would do the same thing because I would then know, hey, this person sits in this area, and I'd give them my contact information. And so then I would actually use them as part of an expanded Vic test. And I'd be like, hey, I'm working on something. Can you help me? And if you've solved their problem, they are more than happy to help you because then they feel like they're the insider and they're getting the latest and greatest. And who doesn't like the latest and greatest? And so that's that trust but verification and building up that rapport and building up all these other things. And and it all sort of ties back together in order to allow us to do what we really are at the heart of it. We're providing connectivity to people who, in some cases, that's their only method of connectivity. And we need to, and that's what this verification part of it is that, yes, we think that there's a lot of these things that are going on. We think that we've done all these things, and we sort of gone off track of things that we want you to know. But at the end of the day, it's all about providing that connectivity. And this verification step, while not in the top 5, is still something that's really handy and really good and something that we need to remember to do, especially for, if you're a customer who's hiring somebody or you run your own network. These are things that, you can do to help make your life better, make things better, make your Wi-Fi better, is, engaging the end user. Because that is, at the end of the day, that's the ultimate verification of our because if they're like, man, it's fantastic, it's great, I don't have any problems.
Yeah, I mean, it's thinking of it from you kick off a new project and you always ask, and we talked about this going back a few of these to the requirements one, right? I need a user survey. I want to know what devices I'm using. I want to know what their experience is expected to be like. And there's always you always hear them like, oh, we can't do that, or we don't want to get you involved. Like, there's always a reason. There's always an excuse, and it's hard to do. But there's no substitute for actually talking to these users. And you're right. Like, to me, you had Vic. I didn't have anybody named quite like that, but people knew. Once you walked around, Once you walked around, they got to know the team, they got to know the names and the faces, and they knew who to ping. For better or worse, sometimes that could be a bad thing, but they were your canary in a coal mine. You knew
Yes.
that if you did a change that night before, that if something was broken, he or she was going to be emailing you or messaging you on Teams or texting you or calling you. And as much as that can be a pain at times when they're like, hey, the new phone came out, it doesn't do what I thought it was going to do. But when you're doing a change, like if they're the first one in the building and they tell you before like everybody else showed up, you have a chance to fix something before like the big bosses come in and go, hey, he broke a change last night. So it's vital. I mean, at the end of the day, the end users are important to keep happy. They're why we do what we do, but they're a huge part of the verification process, believe it or not. I mean, I really do think they are. It's inevitable, right? You're walking around with, whether you've got a Net Scout, Net Ally, whatever, a tablet, you've got some testing tools. You look like somebody looking for something, and either they're going to help you find it or they're going to ask you questions because they think you look a little bit suspicious. And let's be honest, we've been to some wireless conferences. A lot of us doing Wi-Fi look a little sus. So I get it, but it's good to build that rapport with those people because they do give you information that they might not give up to other people. And the other part of it too, just as an aside, like it's the lost in translation stuff. They might tell so-and-so X, and then so-and-so tells you X, but it's actually Y because they left something out because they didn't think it was important. But when you hear it directly from so-and-so, you're like, oh, I wish I had known that. And they're like, well, I told them that. And you're like, well, they filtered it out. So it's just part of it. It doesn't hurt to get away from the desk. It's actually good. It's good to, get up and stretch your legs, but it's really good to verify your sites, whether you're there for a day or for life. It's also, it's a vital part of your job.
The last thing I'll do is I'll tie this back into things we've talked about in the past. Clients and client devices. If you establish this rapport with other people, because so I have 3 different phones sitting on my desk, right? 3 different phones, 3 different operating systems, 3 different generations of Wi-Fi. But that's 3. There are a lot more than that. And so if you can find out people who they have the latest Samsung, or they're an Apple fan, or they do this, they do that, you can then do that to understand the requirements. You can understand the client devices. You can understand how they use it. And so it's a feedback loop that we get into all this that allows us to, build networks that are ultimately going to work. And it's quite frankly, at the end of the day, while it's nice to talk to people, sometimes we don't want anybody to talk to us. So, so that's where we're looking at it. And that's where this trust but verify takes us to. So next on our list, security.
That should be a good time. I have comments, but I'm not going to say it here. It'll get me in trouble. Anyways, I don't have anything else. That's a good point for us or a good stopping point for this one. I can't believe we're already talking about. We've talked about 6, now we're going on to 7. We're nearing the end of it. So yeah, we're nearing the end of it. It's very.
It also means the year's come along, and
yeah, we're already through the first quarter, man. It's April, so.
That's
we're
scary.
gonna have to. I'm just gonna throw out the loaded teaser because I know where we're going, but I'm not gonna give any hints away. But it means we have to start another series, I think. And everybody else listening to us is going, "Oh God, please don't do that." But on that note, I don't have anything else to add. This was a good one. Go get out there and make your own Vic test, people. I think it'll serve you well.
Stretch your legs, meet people.
Oh my God! We're telling Wi-Fi people to socialize outside of our Wi-Fi circle of friends. That's scary.
We might need to rethink that piece of advice there, John.
I was going to say there's some therapists making some money from that, some social anxiety or something. But anyways, I don't mean to jest about the mental health and wellness. But no, it is good to get away from the desks. It's good to engage your audience, if you will, and you'd be amazed what you might find out. And yeah, it goes a long way. Plus, the goodwill, honestly, can save your bacon.
It really can.
Yeah, Vic will tell you something's broken before your boss will tell you something's broken, and then you can fix it, and nobody will know until they listen to the podcast, in which case. But anyways, Mr. Palmer, I've got nothing else for you. It's been a good one.
Yep.
We'll see everybody on the next episode.
See you, everybody.
Hey there. Thanks for listening. If you liked our show and haven't yet done so, please like and subscribe. If you want to contact the show directly, you can email us at ruckcast@comscope.com. Jim and I both read those emails. To learn more about any Ruckus products or services that we've talked about on this or any other prior podcast, please check out our About section of the show or the show notes. And as always, thank you for listening.